I'll simply say what the characterization of and the way we think about art and today, a lot of that comes from the Romantic period. In the way I'm reading through Dante with one of my daughters right now, and we talked last night about how so much we think about romantic love comes from the late Middle Ages, the romances of the Middle Ages, and people didn't. It wasn't that there wasn't romance before then, but it really was accented in a particular way and expressed in a particular way in the Middle Ages, and it's still with us. In the same way, the idea of the artist as the barnstorming, almost demigod, a Promethean figure, that really comes from, in some ways, the withdrawal of religion, the decline of religion in public life, and so artists, in many ways, kind of filled that void. And we see that today with contemporary. A lot of contemporary art is very political. It's very it aims to be philosophical in large part because real political philosophy and other forms of philosophy have withdrawn from the public square, right? But we need to talk about these big questions. So who's going to do it? Well, the artists will. Right. So if the prophets and the religious leaders are not really dealing with metaphysics and these ultimate questions, the artists are going to do it. And so you see this kind of, and Wagner would be a good example, Liszt would be a good example in the musical world. These larger than life artists, though even the seeds of this go back to Homer, where Homer is inspired by the muses, right? And there's a kind of mediation between the divine and the human by the poet. So it has an older history. But I think, I think about the really terrible, awful poetry that I wrote when I was 14. I'm so glad it's gone. I'm so glad that it was lost across time, because that poetry was just about self-expression and what it was like to be 14, right? I'm so thankful. But we all know what that's like. You're just sort of throwing what's in your mind and your heart out on a canvas or in a poem. It's not about making something beautiful. It's not about craft. It's not about becoming an apprentice within a tradition. It's just a kind of, I don't know, it's about expression. Now, Marathon talks about engendering, and this is very interesting. So there's a lot in creative intuition, but if I understand him correctly, he's trying to posit something besides Freud's subconscious, where all the darkness kind of lives and the drives and all of these things. And he's saying, no, there's actually another part here that is spiritual as well. It's precognitive, it's pre-rational, but it's the place where we can go to be in communion with nature, with God, with the beautiful, with other people. And for the artist, the one who has that disposition and that training, that communion brings to birth an artwork. It brings to birth something that is a kind of seed that may never be identifiable within the artwork, but it brings to birth something that properly nurtured and cultivated becomes the work of art. But it's deeply spiritual. It's not just expression. It comes from the person, it comes from the artist, but it comes from that artist being in communion with kind of, I don't remember the exact phrase, but there's a kind of secret music of other beings. There's something deeper down that the artist enters into communion with. That communion leads to an engendering, a bringing to birth of the art. So it's related. You can see a bringing to birth is a kind of expression, but it's not the same thing at all. It's coming from the artist, but it's a more deeply communal thing. And I think that's what we're asked to do, even as those who listen and hear. We're asked to enter into communion with the artist in the artwork and to experience it in that way.